When you call out a narcissist's fake perfection, you are not attacking them. You are simply holding up a mirror they've spent their entire life avoiding. Narcissists build their identity on a carefully engineered illusion, a version of themselves polished, edited, and rehearsed to appear flawless. But beneath that surface lies profound insecurity and an unending fear of being exposed. So when you calmly point out something they hoped no one would notice, an inconsistency, a contradiction, a gap in their own story, it destabilizes them in a way that feels almost existential. What matters here is how you do it. You don't need aggression, confrontation, or emotional charge. In fact, the more neutral your tone, the more powerful your words become. Something as simple as, "You said something different last time," delivered with quiet curiosity, is enough to shake the foundation of their performance. They aren't prepared for calm truth. They're prepared for chaos, defensiveness, and emotional explosions, because that's the environment where they thrive. But clarity, consistency, honest observation, that's where they unravel. You'll notice it immediately. Their eyes shift, their tone sharpens, or they suddenly become overly animated. They may gaslight, deflect, blame, or attempt to change the subject. All of these reactions are symptoms of exposure. In that moment, what humiliates them isn't your statement. It's the fact that you saw something they desperately needed hidden. And what truly infuriates them is that you didn't behave the way they predicted. You didn't collapse. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't feed their ego. You simply questioned the mask. This is the quiet power of self-awareness. It disrupts manipulation without raising your voice. When you illuminate the gap between who the narcissist pretends to be and who they actually are, you reclaim your authority, and they lose their illusion of dominance. Remember this: truth spoken calmly is the one thing a narcissist cannot control. Let that be your strength. When you refuse to react to a narcissist's provocations, you interrupt the psychological contract they rely on to maintain control. Their entire strategy depends on your emotional participation, your anger, your defensiveness, your confusion, your need to explain yourself. These reactions serve as emotional fuel, validating their sense of superiority and confirming that they can shape your internal world. So when you choose neutrality, not as avoidance, but as conscious discipline, you remove the very foundation of their influence. This isn't passivity, it's mastery. It's the understanding that not every stimulus deserves a response, and not every attack requires a counterattack. When a narcissist tries to provoke you through mockery, exaggeration, guilt, or subtle insults, they are testing the boundaries of your emotional self-control. But the moment you remain still, they face something they are deeply unprepared for: a person who does not dance to their psychological choreography. You might simply say, "I'm not responding to this," or "Let's talk when the conversation is respectful." These statements are disarming because they reflect inner stability. They expose the narcissist's emotional volatility without you ever needing to point it out. They show that the power dynamic has shifted, that you no longer accept the role they cast you in, and the narcissist feels it instantly. They become agitated, confused, even desperate, because your calmness invalidates their entire tactic. They need you to erupt so they can justify their behavior. They need you to defend yourself so they can twist your words. They need you to break so they can feel whole. When you refuse to participate, you force them to confront their own emotional emptiness, a humiliation far deeper than any insult. This is the quiet revolution of self-governance, the recognition that your inner state is yours alone. Hold that power. Use it wisely. Let your calm be the boundary they cannot cross. When you state your boundaries clearly, something remarkable happens. The narcissist is forced to confront a reality they've spent their entire life resisting. Other people exist as independent beings. Boundaries are not walls, they are declarations of identity. They communicate where you end and where someone else begins. And for a narcissist, this is deeply unsettling because their psychological framework depends on collapsing those distinctions. They want your time, your attention, your emotional labor, all without limitation. So the moment you say, "That doesn't work for me," or "I'm not available for this," you're not just setting a limit, you're dismantling their illusion of entitlement. What makes boundaries so powerful is their simplicity. You don't need explanations or justifications. In fact, the more concise you are, the more authority your words carry. A narcissist thrives on pulling you into long debates, emotional negotiations, and endless attempts to defend yourself. But when you stay grounded in clarity, you cut off the oxygen to those dynamics. You're no longer participating in their game. You're simply stating what you will and won't accept. And that alone is enough to expose the imbalance they've been hiding behind charm, manipulation, or superiority. You'll notice their reaction almost immediately. They may become irritated, dismissive, or even attempt to belittle your request. That resistance is proof of the boundary's effectiveness. Narcissists interpret limits as humiliation because it reminds them they are not the center of your internal universe. You are no longer an extension of their will, you are a person with agency. And that realization destabilizes the power dynamic they rely on. The deeper truth is this: boundaries are a form of self-respect made visible. They don't just protect you, they redefine the entire relationship. Hold them firmly, speak them calmly, and let them reveal who truly belongs in your life. There is something profoundly revealing about how a narcissist reacts when someone else becomes the center of attention. It exposes the fragile architecture of their self-esteem, because their sense of identity is built almost entirely on comparison. They don't want to be good, they want to be better. They don't want admiration, they want exclusive admiration. So when you praise someone else, especially for qualities the narcissist pretends to possess, you disrupt the hierarchy they've constructed in their mind. And you do it without ever confronting them directly. You might comment on another person's kindness, competence, discipline, or integrity. You might acknowledge someone's growth or resilience. These are simple observations, but in the narcissist's internal world, they are perceived as a threat. Why? Because the narcissist's value system has no room for shared excellence. If someone else shines, it means they shine less, and that perceived dimming of their light is experienced as humiliation. What makes this so psychologically powerful is that your praise is not aimed at them. You are not criticizing or accusing. You are merely acknowledging reality outside their ego-bound field of vision. And because you're not hostile, They cannot frame your words as an attack. They're forced to sit with the discomfort of not being the focal point, and that discomfort exposes their dependency on external validation. You'll often see them try to redirect the conversation back to themselves, minimize the other person's accomplishments, or insert a subtle insult disguised as concern. These attempts reveal the depth of their insecurity far more clearly than anything you could have said directly. In that moment, their reaction becomes the humiliation, not your words. There is quiet strength in honoring what deserves to be honored, even when it challenges someone's inflated self-image. Let your praise for others be the reminder that no one gets to monopolize the light. When you choose calm, logical truth over emotional reaction, you step into a position of psychological clarity that a narcissist cannot navigate. Their entire method of influence depends on pulling you into emotional terrain where facts become blurry and feelings become weapons. They rely on exaggeration, selective memory, and emotional distortion because these tools allow them to destabilize your sense of reality. But the moment you anchor yourself in objective truth, spoken without heat, without urgency, without defensiveness, you strip their tactics of their power. Saying something as simple as, "Let's stick to the facts," acts like a boundary and a mirror at the same time. It prevents them from dragging you into their emotional labyrinth, and it forces them to confront the inconsistencies in their own narrative. Narcissists don't fear disagreement, they fear clarity. They fear the quiet precision of truth because it reveals what their emotional manipulation tried to conceal. And the beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require you to match their intensity. You don't need to argue or prove your intelligence. You simply remain rooted in what is objectively verifiable. This steadiness exposes how chaotic and unstable their arguments truly are. It also highlights a deeper psychological divide. While they manipulate to maintain control, you speak truth to maintain integrity. Their reaction will often be immediate: defensiveness, mockery, sudden anger, or an attempt to twist your factual statement into something else entirely. These responses are not signs of your failure, but signs of their discomfort. They cannot dominate a conversation that is grounded in reality, because reality limits their performance. In the end, logical truth becomes a form of quiet rebellion. It protects your mind from distortion and forces them to confront the limits of their influence. Let your clarity be the line they cannot cross. There is a profound shift that occurs when you make it clear you don't need a narcissist. Not in a dramatic proclamation, not in a moment of anger, but in the steady, grounded awareness that your life is not dependent on their approval. Narcissists depend on the illusion that you are tied to them, emotionally, socially, or psychologically. They need to believe that your sense of worth rises and falls in relation to their presence. So when you calmly express independence, when you say something like, "I'm okay on my own," or "Your approval isn't necessary for my decisions," you disrupt the core of their identity structure. This isn't about rejecting them. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about recognizing that the validation they weaponize can only hurt you if you're still seeking it. The moment you step out of that dynamic, the moment you no longer look to them for emotional orientation, the power they held dissolves, and they feel that loss with surprising intensity. For a narcissist, nothing is more humiliating than realizing they are not essential. It strikes at the heart of their grandiosity, the narrative they've built where others orbit around their significance. Your independence becomes a mirror, reflecting their deepest fear that underneath the bravado, they are not irreplaceable, not necessary, not superior. This is why you may see them react with sudden charm, guilt, tripping, or even anger. They are trying to pull you back into a position where your sense of self is entangled with their opinion. But when you remain centered, when your voice stays steady, and your choices stay aligned with your own values, they can no longer script your emotional reality. The deeper truth is simple. Autonomy is the one thing a narcissist cannot counterfeit, cannot control, and cannot take from you. Choose it, and you reclaim your life.